Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Story Impact. I'm your host, Lisa Tolles. Why are we here? Because everyone loves a good story. This series showcases authors, their books, their craft, and artistic vision. In these conversations, we explore aspects of their writing journey, how they got started, challenges they've faced, and who helps them stay on track. But we also discuss the purpose driving the creation of their books, what brings them back to the keyboard and that empty page day after day. I'm also a crime novelist, and you can find my books on Amazon and on lisatolles.com. All right, so I'm so excited to be here with my good friend Ellen Kirschman. Ellen is an award-winning police and public safety psychologist. She's the author of 3 nonfiction books in the Dot Meyerhoff mystery series, which we'll be talking all about today. Ellen finds writing fiction to be therapeutic because she gets to take potshots at nasty cops, incompetent psychologists, and 2 ex-husbands. So I want to tell you about her series. Police psychologist Dot Meyerhoff is embedded in a department that isn't sure it trusts her. Determined to help her police officer clients cope with traumatic stress and tragedy, she often steps out of her role, coming face to face with dangerous criminals, putting herself and her family and her job at risk. And this series is inspired by real-life events, exposing the pain behind the badge, suicides, sexism, tragic mistakes, dysfunctional families, and the challenges faced by a dedicated psychologist with a too big heart. Ellen lives in Redwood City, California with her husband, who she says whose entire life she has plagiarized for Dot's love interest, Frank. Ellen, warmest welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, well, let's get started because you have such an interesting background. I want to share it with our viewers. So, you've had a really unique and interesting career as a psychologist specializing in law enforcement. What drew you to the psychology field and to supporting law enforcement personnel and families as kind of your life's work?
Well, it's a long path. We haven't got time for the entire path, but it was as I was working as a clinician at the time. I was a social worker, and I saw several. At the time, mostly we had male officers, so I saw several of their wives coming in for therapy, and I got really intrigued with the stories they were telling me about how difficult it was to be married to a cop. And when I asked them to bring their cop husbands into a therapy session, not only did the cop husbands never show up, but the spouses also dropped out of therapy. So this got me even more curious about what was going on in people's homes and the influence of the job on, well, one's family life. Uh, Without knowing really much about it, I went up to my local community college and said, "Hey, I'd like to put on a class for police officers' wives, because I think that if they understood more about what was going on with their husbands' jobs, then that we could sort of fix it." Very naive on my part, by the way. But the remarkable thing that happened was that when the college catalog went out, the class was filled immediately, and we had 40 women on the waiting list. And that told me that I really had hit a need in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Because we train cops all the time, but we do not, the job spills over to home, and we don't train families about how to deal with it. They actually act as unpaid assistants to the police department. So that drove me back to get my doctorate and write a dissertation about the same subject. And then because no one else was doing this kind of work with families, I just started getting work. And it was just intriguing to me. The police world is a story world. That's how they transmit, how
Mm-hmm.
they train, how they communicate. Much of it is through stories and examples. So as a writer, of course, there was all kinds of wonderful material for me.
Mm. So interesting. All right, well, thinking about that kind of rich hotbed of story material, you started out sharing your expertise by writing nonfiction books. And, you just identified that there was a significant need in the community that hadn't been tapped before. But then you shifted to fiction. So I'm curious about that leap. How did you make that shift? And did you have any teachers or like mentors who helped you get into fiction writing and publishing?
Well, after the third nonfiction book, and by the way, my nonfiction books outsell fiction like that nobody's business.
Really?
Yeah, so I mean, if this was just a business for me, I'd probably keep on writing nonfiction. But I just got tired of reality in a certain way, I guess. And I got that it's a burden to, in many ways, to have to get science right and get all your quotes down and get your footnotes. And while my nonfiction books, I think, are readable because they're for the lay public, there still was a lot of responsibility. And I said to myself, geez, it's got to be easier to make this stuff up. Well, that was delusional. It's much harder, I think, to write fiction than it is to write nonfiction because you can put down a nonfiction book, go visit your aunt and come home and pick it up again. But I think we all in fiction want to be swept away. So my mentor in writing nonfiction is a woman named Harriet Goldhor Lerner, who wrote several wonderful books. I still recommend them to this day: The Dance of Anger, The Dance of Intimacy, and several others beyond that. In terms of a mentor for fiction, I'm just widely read. And so I think I learned from what I didn't like in fiction and said I could do better, or I learned from what I really admired in fiction from other fiction writers. But
Mm,
it definitely a new learning curve for me to craft a book out of fiction. I'm fortunate enough to know some writers, to have some in my family. So there were people who would read for me and give me some feedback, and that's always been very helpful.
mm. Well, I think you're doing a great job with that leap, having read some of your fiction books. I haven't read any of your nonfiction, but what I can say about your fiction is that not only is it like very consumable and very readable in terms of the characters and the challenges that they face, but it has that element of authenticity. I mean, I think even if I didn't know that you had walked in Dot Meyerhoff's shoes and that, you created her from your own career, it still has that element of authenticity, which just makes the reading experience better, I think.
Thank you. Wow.
I want to comment on one thing you said. I personally find nonfiction way harder than fiction. Oh my goodness.
Really?
I've written one or two nonfiction books and I write articles for magazines and it's just like pulling teeth and fiction is just the escape. Not saying that fiction is always completely automatic for me, it's not. But anyway, getting back to you, how did your series protagonist Dot evolve? Like, did you use your creativity to just kind of spin her out of thin air? Was she modeled after a real person, or did she kind of like come to you in some way?
Well, she's kind of modeled after me. And although she is younger and thinner and takes risks with her clients that I probably would have lost my license had I done some of the things that she's done. But I really was inspired by the officers I've worked with, the families I've worked with, so that there's an element, as you say, of reality in all of these books. And that goes for what it feels like to be a psychologist working someplace where people have a very hard time trusting psychologists. So
Mm,
I, as we all do, I mind my own experience, my own reactions, and then I just changed some of some of the other facts to create an entirely new person. But there's an awful lot of me in these books, and people who know me can hear my voice. Since
mhm,
I write first persons, they can actually
mhm,
uh, hear me talking.
mhm. Well, let me ask you something about that too. I mean, these books are written in the first person. Did you consciously decide that? I mean, because I think for a long time, thriller and mystery novels were third person, and now it's more kind of sort of half and half. Like, was that a conscious decision, or did it just sort of come out that way?
Well, when I started writing fiction, I wrote an entire book in third person, and it was terrible. So, with my sister-in-law, Doris Ober, who is, she's retired now, but she was an editor, so she's been really helpful to me. And so I rewrote it again. There was just something that was forced and not believable about that first book. So I rewrote the whole thing again in first person. And once I started doing that, it took off because I could use my own voice. I could use my own points of view, my own opinions. It just, it was much easier for me to write in first person. I've written a couple of short stories in third person, but never a book length piece of work.
Interesting. So Dot is a character that you've lived with for a long time now. Are there any ways in which she has surprised you?
That's a really interesting question because, now I'm up to 5 books, so I know her very well. There certainly have been surprises. So, for example, I can remember getting off an elevator. I was in a police department working. I got off the elevator doors open. There were some cops waiting to get on. And I turned around and said to them, "Do you know, I just realized Dot's father was a 1960s student radical who was arrested by the police." And they looked at me, as they often looked at me, like, "Oh, here comes crazy lady. What's she doing now?" So that was a surprise. Bits and pieces of her life have been a surprise. It's been a surprise. I have her, she is a therapist of her own, and I just had so much fun writing that part. I think that was in book 4, the answer to his prayers, or perhaps in book 3, I can't remember. But she is so reluctant, as many therapists are, to get therapy of her own. And she's a lot of cold feet about getting into a relationship with Frank. It takes her 3 books actually to be able to do that. So I think I was a little surprised, although there was something familiar, having been married more than once, about her reluctance to get involved in a relationship. So I think I'm giving you a muddled answer here, but some pieces of her life are surprising, but mostly she feels like a very familiar person to me.
I get that. I can understand that. What aspect of the series brings you the most joy and meaning?
Also a really good question. And the craft of writing brings me a great deal of pleasure. I mean, that when you get into that zone and things are chugging along, it's wonderful. It's just a great feeling. And when surprises emerge from the story, that may not be from Dot, it might be a new character or something that happened or a turn of events. That is a great deal of fun. And the idea that I have created an entire universe out of nothing with people who feel real to me and to my readers out of nothing gives me a lot of joy. Now, in terms of purpose, when I started writing fiction, my purpose was to use fiction as a vehicle to reveal to the reader the kinds of wear and tear and challenges that cops face and that their families face right along with them. I think, and so I had some particular topical issues I wanted to cover in the fiction, like police suicide. Most people don't know cops are twice as, or more than twice as likely to take their own lives as they are to be killed in the line of duty. I wanted to talk about the difficulties of being an ICAC investigator, that internet crimes against children, what that job does to you, and from a client that I've had who had a terrible time touching his own children in the bathtub because of what he'd seen in the kinds of internet clips he was viewing. I wanted to talk about what it was like to be female in a largely male-dominated profession, or what it was like to accidentally kill somebody because in the dark you thought that metal object was a gun and it turns out to be a cell phone, and you never in your whole career, in your whole life, ever intended to kill somebody. I wanted to talk about what it's like if you're a white cop with a black person that you've just shot, an unarmed black person. So there were all of these issues that I wanted to use my stories to sort of dig around in and present in a way that I didn't have to do writing nonfiction, which is a little more, as you said, kind of stodgy and academic. And I think that now with 5 books under my belt, the 5th book, I mean, all the books have cops and police in them, but the 5th book probably moves, Call Me Carmela, moves further away from the behind the badge kind of thing and centers more on the child of a police officer.
Interesting. Wow. I that brings up so many more questions, but I know we don't have that much time. One question I want to ask about your writing process, but I also want to ask something else about Carmela. You know, you mentioned that now you're on book 5. How has she changed? How have the challenges that you've put before her changed her and transformed her as a clinician and as a person?
Well, I think she is. When I started writing mysteries, I had this idea that your protagonist always had to get into some kind of fight with the antagonist. And so as the books have changed, and it's ridiculous Dot's in her early 50s, so she can't be, getting into physical altercations with people. So she's using her brain a lot more as the books go on. So that and avoiding putting herself in situations of physical danger. She's changed in that she has, over time, finally gotten past her reluctance to get into a relationship with Frank, or with any man for that matter, but with Frank in particularly. And so I think, and she's gotten more kinder in retrospect to her parents. She had a difficult conflict-filled upbringing, and her father is dead, but he sort of sits on one of her shoulders and talks to her all the time. He thinks she's an absolute traitor for dealing with the police because he is quite a radical person. She's gotten to understand and appreciate her mother's sort of flower child mentality toward the world. And then one other thing that just occurs to me early on in her career, in the very first book, when she's kind of brand new at this police department, not brand new to working with cops, but to the police department. And this is not a spoiler, you learn this on the first page. She loses a young rookie to suicide. And his memory and haunts her, and she feels terribly guilty. What more could she have done? What should she not have done? So this plagues her, and as the books go on, and particularly in Call Me Carmela, she softens on her being very hard on herself, because she has extremely high standards for herself as a clinician.
Interesting. All right, so now we know all about Carmela, and we've learned a lot about you. I want to ask about your writing process. So let's think of it this way. Would you call yourself a disciplined writer, like writing consistently at a certain time every day, or do you just kind of write whenever the mood strikes you? How much do you write at one sitting? Like, tell us about those mechanics.
Before I do, I just want to point out, you've learned a little more about Dot, not about Carmela, because Carmela is the 16-year-old.
Sorry, yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah, girl in this book,
yes,
and we didn't talk that much about her. Oh heavens, I am the most undisciplined writer. I really, I do try to have a life and outside of writing as well. What's really been helpful to me, particularly since the pandemic, is our Sisters in Crime writing group at 1 o'clock. And that really helps me stay on track to look at my watch and say, all right, go turn on the computer and get to work. I am not an early morning writer like so many people are. I go to the gym in the morning. I really love spending time reading the New York Times over my tea. And my husband and I have what we call a business meeting every morning.
Mm,
We talk about, and sometimes we read to each other. So I often don't get to my computer until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I'll work for maybe till 5 or 6.
mm. Okay, that's a lot. I like that. So that's like structure, but not structure. I like that kind of in between. Um, let's talk about publishing for a minute. So, what impacts have all the changes in the publishing landscape? What impacts have they had on your writing process, your writing career, in the process of bringing your books to readers? Because so much has shifted over like a short time, right?
Totally. I have a checkered path here. My very first publisher was very small, went out of business with about a week's notice. I had a brief, uh, no, then I got another tradition, then I got a traditional publisher and wrote, they bought the book from the first publisher, and then I wrote two more, and then basically they fired me and I fired them. I don't know, they weren't helping at all promoting things. And I understand that that I know many other people that with that publisher have had the same
Mm.
problem. So after that happened, I was a little distraught, and then I went into self-publishing for a brief time. I actually did better than I did with that publisher, and now I've been really fortunate to have all of my books, um, the new one, Call Me Carmela, and my backlist picked up by Open Road Media, who've been doing a terrific job helping with promotion, and in a way none of the other publishers have.
That's awesome. That's a great kind of spectrum that you've traveled, and you ended up in a great place. Can you tell us now a little bit about Carmela?
Okay. Well, Carmela is the 18-year-old daughter of Fran. Fran is Dot's friend. She runs Fran's Cafe, which is modeled after Anne's Cafe on Fruitvale Avenue in Oakland. That used to
Mhm.
be a place for cops to hang out.
Mhm.
And and she is the Kenilworth Police Department's only police widow. So when she asks for something, she gets it. And she asks Dot to help her with Ava, this 18-year-old goddaughter who is adopted and wants to look for her birth parents. The fact that she wants to look for her birth parents has totally unhinged her adoptive parents, who are terrified and frightened that they're going to lose her somehow. And Ava will not be dissuaded from doing this. So Dot starts to talk to her, and driven again by the memory of Ben, that young officer who took his own life,
Mhm.
she's concerned about that there might be another young person who she would not help enough. And she's really worried that this young girl, who's pretty turbulent and very determined, might harm herself if somebody doesn't help her. So Dot gets involved, helps her find her birth mother. The birth mother wants nothing to do with Ava, which is yet another blow to poor Ava, who believes that she was set up for adoption because she was unlovable. And then we learn the real story of what happened all those years ago, and Dot helps negotiate how this information gets passed around. And there's lots of twists and turns, and what ultimately she finds out, and that that Ava, who is determined and like Dot never gives up, what she finds out is going to destroy one family and heal another.
Mm,
It was
okay.
really interesting. They're doing the research in the world of what illegal adoptions in that whole world. I knew nothing about that. And boy, it is a universe of joy and despair in
Hmm.
equal parts.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to read about what happens to Dot while all of this is going on. I mean, of course, I'm so curious about Carmela as a young woman looking for her place in the world and all of, all of the challenges that just naturally come with that. All right, so I have two questions left. One of them is I want to go back into kind of a philosophical question, and I would love to hear what's something you know now about writing that you wish you knew when you were first getting started.
That this is a long game. I think when we begin writing and we get a book published, whether self-published or traditionally published, we think the world is going to change. It takes years, really years to get an agent, years to get published, years to write a book. I'm not a quick writer. Years to build a newsletter list, years to get. I mean, all of this takes a long time. There are, overnight wonders, but those are few and far between. So I wish somebody had told me that. Be patient and never give up. I don't give up anyhow. I'm very persistent, but as you can tell from my path to publishing here. But yeah, I wish somebody had told me, slow down. It takes a long time.
Be patient, never give up. Love
Yeah.
it.
No.
All right. Well, would you please hold up a copy of Call Me Carmela and little higher. Nice cover. I love that cover.
Open Road gave me beautiful new covers. Yes.
Beautiful. The whole series is beautiful. I've seen them. When is this book out? The book's out now, right?
It's up for pre-order and it launches next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Okay, excellent. And where is it going to be available? On Amazon and all online retailers?
All online and available as an ebook and as an in-print as well.
Okay, excellent. Ellen, what's your website so that people can learn more about you?
I am at www.ellenkirschman.com.
Okay, I will spell that out for viewers. Thank
I,
you so much for joining me. And sorry, I cut you off.
so well, I'm going to thank you, and your questions are really deep and interesting. Thank you so much for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. And we'll keep those stories going and see you next time.
Bye.